r/AskReddit, what's your I finally met my online friend horror story? I used to play WoW with my now ex. Our guild leader actually wound up moving to our state with his wife. My ex and I broke up before we got the chance to hang out with the guy, and right after the breakup he messaged my ex essentially asking if it was cool if he and his wife got me drunk and took advantage of me. Ex showed me screenshots when I was getting my stuff from his place and I cancelled my plans to meet the guy and his wife. My ex had been physically abusive and broke up with me to date the girl he cheated on me with. I'd tried leaving before but he'd fake suicide attempts and I was so scared he'd go through with it, so I stayed. Even though he was in a new relationship he tried to keep tabs on me and control me, but I saw it as my chance to escape. I happened to move right after we split and he didn't know my new address. I blocked him on everything. Somehow he kept getting information on me though. Turns out the guild leader was feeding him everything. I hadn't deleted the guy off Facebook cause I figured he was only a problem in person. When I confronted him over Messenger, bringing up the abuse, and the guy said, he choked you because you guys were arguing and he was afraid he wouldn't get the chance to speak. He still loves you. Side note. The choking was cause I was defending myself against accusations of cheating, which I hadn't done. Met this dude on EverQuest and we've played games together ever since. Been a part of the same guild, help each other out on mobile games, and have conversations about life in general. It isn't him that's the horror story, it was his mom. So one day, I think we were playing WoW at the time. I log on to do some quests. Suddenly his user comes on and asks to chat by video. We've done this before and there's no problem, but after I click to start the video chat, there's his mom butt naked on the screen. She asks me to watch her masturbate and I'm like, no lady, this is just awkward AF, and I log off for a few days. I get an email from my friend and he wants to know why I haven't shown up for quests or anything. So I tell him what happened and he is seriously like, WTF. Turns out his mom had been doing this to a lot of his online buddies and she eventually goes to prison for raping a minor or two. Buddy's doing great though, wife and kids, plus we still play the occasional game together. I never actually met him, but I used to play RuneScape when I was younger, around 11ish. I didn't pay for the member account, so there were a bunch of items and things I couldn't get. Some members started gifting me things and I was super grateful. Every time I went on he would help me with my quests and whatever. But over time he started asking more personal questions like what I looked like, what I liked to do, etc. etc. In return he told me his first name, that he was 14 and that he was in the army as some cadet program or something, but back visiting family blah blah. I knew nothing about the army. A cadet program at that age didn't sound that far-fetched to little ol' me. He started to escalate how he was talking to me and started sending me messages like, hi sexy, miss you, come back and talk to me babe, etc. I stopped replying because I was creeped out and was 11. I still thought boys were gross. Anyway, in school the next day I was making small talk with a girl I sat next to and she mentioned how her brother was home and how much she'd missed him while he'd been away in the army. I got a sinking feeling then, which continued when she told me his name, The Match. In desperation I asked her if he ever played RuneScape, in which she said he did and his username was friend's username. She showed me a picture and told me about how she was really excited about how he'd finally found his calling in the army. Dude was 26. Yikes. Guy I knew in college met a girl online and spent every day talking about her. She lived about 6 hours away, so he planned to take a semester off and pursue this relationship. He got a job in her town and asked if I'd help him off out there since my car would hold more than he could take on a bus. I had a long weekend off and figured, why not? A road trip could be fun. I'd drive him out as a goodbye present, and the way back I planned to visit Yellowstone. Well, we arrive and it turns out he doesn't have an apartment lined up and He found a job posting in his girlfriend's town. He hadn't actually gotten the job. Or even applied yet. I make a bunch of phone calls and find him a room to rent that will let him move in that day with just first, last, and deposit, even without a job. I'm tired and disgusted with his lack of planning, but figure it's worth staying the night and trying to end things on good terms with my buddy. Then he breaks down and confesses that he hasn't actually met this girl. The nights he spent video chatting with her were really just him watching her vlog and jacking it. They've never talked. Never texted. Never even emailed. Hell, he's never even left so much as a comment or like on one of her videos. She genuinely didn't, still doesn't, know he existed. His plan was to hang out at this game shop she talks a lot about until she showed up and somehow create a relationship from that. He thought that they'd meet and she'd fall in love with him and move back to our college town to marry him. All before the next semester began. That didn't happen. Instead, I made my buddy buy a bus ticket for his ride back to school and left. He came back to school and got more cranny, not less. I lost track of him after that. Oh, finally I have somewhere to tell this story, but it's probably too late to get any real traction. Long story short, when I was doing a lot of online dating I had multiple accounts across multiple platforms. One happened to be FitLife. I used pictures that I hadn't put online before, with my face cropped out. It didn't pan out, however. I didn't really like any of the guys that messaged me. I was polite to them all but ultimately kind of abandoned my profile. Cue Tinder. I match with a guy that looks white collar, tailored, professional. Just my type. We match, talk for a week or so until we decide to get drinks. I get to the bar, took an Uber there, and look around. Don't see him. Until this scraggly looking guy comes up to me and says, "Oh hey Grenadine Garden." I thought I'd never make it. Now, I'm not unusually one to judge by appearances. We all have rough days and Lord knows I don't wear makeup or do my hair on the busiest of them, but his hair was significantly longer. Think short, well manicured hair versus mid-back length uncombed waves. He was covered in a patchy beard, and dressed really badly. I honestly didn't recognize him, and he waved it off with sorry. Those pictures are kind of old. Red flag stupidly ignored. We grab a small table with huge chair and start drinking and talking. One drink. Just to be polite, but I'm turned off at this point wholly. Then, the kicker. He leans in toward me, puts his hand on my thigh, and says, "You know, after you didn't message me back on FetLife, I'm surprised we matched on Tinder. You really are quite beautiful." At this point I'm like, "I'm sorry?" He chuckles, literally chuckles like a villain in a movie, pats my thigh, and says I'm going to the bathroom. "You should look at your profile and figure it out. I found you because your body is quite distinct." It's worth noting we live in a major international tourist city. There are thousands upon thousands of new people here every day. Especially on Tinder. This is not a small town. I used to match with people that would swipe between connecting flights. So I'm beyond nervous, watch him get up and go, and I quickly check my FetLife inbox and lo and behold, he had messaged me months ago. His profile picture looked like an absolute serial killer. I remember why I rejected him. Incompatible on all fronts. And I was polite. So anyways, I got to use the whole angel shot protocol. In which I basically ran to the bartender, explained the situation, and left through the back door. I was beyond uncomfortable. And deleted all of my social media for a few months. And I consider myself lucky that he only sent a few "You're a whore etc" messages for the rest of the evening but gave up after that. And I paid for my own drink, too. I'm not a monster. This is way back in the mid-90s. Bulletin board systems were all the rage. I made friends with this guy from NC. He was friends with a bunch of us from my dorm, mostly females, which should probably have been a red flag, but I was extremely naive at the time. A couple months in, he mentioned he was coming to our state for a wedding and asked if he could come by our college to meet everyone. It was agreed he'd sleep in my dorm room since my roommate was almost never around. Now, there was no discussion or thought of sex, but I was pretty excited to meet this guy and see if he was as funny and charming as he was online. Well, day arrives, dude shows up. I should mention that I and all my college friends were 18 or 19. This guy was 24. Or so he said. Guy looked like, and I'm not exaggerating, a cancer patient. Pale. Horned features, long greasy pale blonde hair except where he was bald on top, and just generally looked like he was about to die or he was dressed as a ghoul for Halloween. He insisted on hugging all of us. I was trying to remind myself that looks don't matter and that he was a cool guy despite his very unsettling appearance. But then, when we all started hanging out, things just got worse. He was asking really invasive questions of all of us, making weird comments to whatever was said, just all around creepy and distressing. I was sitting on the floor with another friend and actively rocking back and forth from discomfort. I lied and said I had hurt my back and that sleeping on the floor helped, because that night he kept insisting we could share my tiny twin college bed. Nope. Last time I ever met anyone from that site. Flashback 15 years ago. I was talking to a person online I'd known for a few years. We weren't best friends, but we talked daily. Seemed like a nice guy. At some point he asked where I was from, and I mentioned that I lived in Philly and I was going to the Art Institute there, living in the dorms. Didn't give specifics other than that. Most people knew I was an art student at the time. I posted it about regularly on LiveJournal. A few days later I come home from class and see a message on AIM. Figured out where you live. I'm outside of the dorms at the cafe across the street. Meet me. This guy lived on the West Coast, and after finding out where I lived, he makes an unannounced trip across the country, tracked down the building where I lived in, and was camped out at the cafe across the street. Asking him to meet him. All of this without any heads up. I immediately felt uncomfortable, and didn't really know what to do. It's one thing to meet up, another thing entirely to make a trip cross-country and camp out in front of a person's residence. I didn't answer the AIM message right away and needed some time to calm down and think, get more rational. More messages started coming through, each reading slightly more hostile than the last. Okay, this guy traveled all this way. It'd be a dick move to ignore him. But at the same time, I felt like I was seeing red flags everywhere. I was legitimately creeped out. More messages came. And each time, they started to get more agitated, more impatient. He started asking for my class schedule so he could meet me outside class, asking where I'd be going, where I usually ate, what time my dinner schedule was. He started getting weirdly specific about wanting to know about every facet of my life. I was getting full-on stalker vibes. So I lied, and told him that I was visiting my sister and that I'd be back over the weekend, and I'd just miss him. That's when he said that's fine. I can wait. And he did. 3 days later, he's still there, still messaging me that he's still at the cafe. Waiting. What the fuck are you waiting for? Why are you here? Why didn't you tell me you were coming? My privacy was having huge issues with all of this, and it got to the point I started feeling legitimately scared. I made a decision. Rather than meet him, I'd log out AIM, create a new handle, pretend I never existed at that point. I completely abandoned my LiveJournal and started posting under a new name, and went so far as to change my entire online persona. I never heard from him again. I met a guy online. We really got on and he came over a few times so we could hang out. I did find him attractive and tried to hint that I was into him. Note, I can't flirt to save my life, but nothing ever happened. After a few dates he suddenly vanished offline. No social media. He wasn't answering texts or emails, nothing. I thought he'd ghosted me. After 6 months he reappears. I asked him where he'd been and he said I don't want to talk about it. A few weeks after, there was a fad where people were googling their names and posting humorous stories they had found about similar people with their name. Mine was about a ship that had my initials, and I started to Google friends' names just out of boredom, morbid curiosity. Googled his name and found a local news story from his area. One of those crime and courts things that he had been done for statutory rape of a minor, online grooming, and had his computer and phone seized as evidence. Had an online friend for well over a decade. She lived around Atlanta and I went down there to visit my aunt and cousin. Turns cousin was out of town and my aunt was too old to go around sightseeing. Hit up online friend and she and her boyfriend weren't far from me so we met up. They were homeless and couch surfing at the time so I paid for everything. Didn't really care, I had vacation money to burn. The trip was fine, no real issues. When I got home things started going sour. They got kicked out of the friend's place so the boyfriend asked me multiple times for money to get back on their feet. I sympathized but I spent all my spare cash on vacation so I declined. Eventually they broke up and she moved in with family. She claimed he was abusive, which I never saw signs of, but he did tell her some ridiculous things. He said he had to get dick reduction surgery cause it was too big. Other equally ridiculous things about his military career made me realize that my friend was pretty naive about how the world works. She never held a job. No higher education, which I don't judge as a tradesman, never really had any sort of financial responsibility as she was entirely dependent on family or boyfriends. Basically in a state of arrested development. So one day she texts me saying she wants kids but doesn't want another man in her life. So she asks if I will donate my sperm to her. I'd have no obligation to the children whatsoever, just be a donor. I agreed if she could prove she was financially stable first. She flipped the fuck out, said I was just another man trying to control her. I was raised by a single parent so I know how hard it is and I don't want a child to go through that with a parent who can't provide. She got more angry and I got fed up and told her off. We haven't spoken since. A 15-year-ish friendship died that day. Sorry if this is rambling, I'm on mobile and don't make large posts often. TL. Dr. Irresponsible friend wants me to be a sperm donor. I refuse until she gets her life together. Back during WoW's second expansion there was this guy in my guild I'd become friends with mostly through other friends. We talked more and more over time and became fairly close. He had this asshole roommate, and I could hear the guy sometimes, especially when something went wrong during a raid. He'd scream and throw fits. He was pretty awful sounding. My friend told me he wasn't just loud and obnoxious, but verbally and sometimes physically abusive, too. I had my own apartment, so I said, you know what, come stay with me. Just long enough to get you on your feet and into a place that's safe. He showed up at my place with a trash bag full of his stuff and a laptop. I set him up in the apartment and started trying to help him find a job. Well, he did not want a job. He did not get a job, either. He sat in my apartment, day after day, eating my food and slowly draining my savings. No matter how hard I tried to get him motivated, he would just dig in his heels and somehow become more sedentary. Eventually I told him he had to go. I couldn't afford to keep him there. He was just couch surfing. I spoke to some people and eventually pieced together that his method of securing a new temporary place was playing on the sympathies of his friends to convince them he was in a terrible living situation. It just worked really well on me because he had that loud, obnoxious roommate to play off of. He wound up calling a nearby relative to come and get him, I think his aunt. I don't know what he told her I supposedly did, but I have never seen a more venomous look from someone in my life. As far as I know, he moved in with his sister and brother-in-law after that, but frankly I don't care where he ended up. He also stole a bunch of my stuff. First and last time I do anything like that. I've been active in numerous online communities over the years, and have been fortunate enough to hang out with many of the friends I've made there in person. There's only been one incident I couldn't cope with. He picked me up at the airport, which was very nice of him, and as soon as we got into the car, he started picking his nose. There's a lot that goes through your mind when you hop into a vehicle with someone you've never been alone with and you immediately catch them two knuckles deep in their rostrum. I looked quickly away so that he wouldn't know I caught him and be embarrassed, if he was just trying to sneak one out before I noticed. If he did notice, he didn't seem embarrassed, so I relaxed a little. I guessed maybe he was just so confident about himself and our friendship that he descended past caring if I saw him take care of a quick boog. Fine, sure. When I finally looked back at him, he was wiping his fingers across his dashboard. To this day I'm not really sure what to think, but this guy spent the entirety of the few hours we were together scooping out boogers and wiping them off on parts of his car or the table or wherever it was that we'd stopped at. I realized I was being transported in a rolling booger shrine and that there was nothing I could touch without needing to wash my hands. I was sitting on a crust of fossilized booger stuff. I had to be. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, he was a nice dude, but I wound up pulling out of our visit early because I couldn't handle it. I don't consider myself a clean freak, but as wiping started to stack it was all I could do not to throw open the passenger door and roll myself out into traffic to escape. I still wonder if I should have done or said anything to save him some grief in the future, but it didn't feel like it was my place, you know? What do you even say? Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you were at all entertained, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing for future content. Stay safe everyone, until next time.